Lauren Simpson had always believed in forever. At 44, she was preparing for what she called the second honeymoon of her life, the celebration of her 25th wedding anniversary with Scott, the boy she'd fallen in love with back in high school. They were the couple everyone envied. He, a respected attorney in New Jersey, she, the devoted homemaker who made their suburban home a warm nest of love, tradition, and endless laughter. The plan was to renew their vows in the garden at sunset, under a canopy of white roses and fairy lights. She imagined herself walking toward him again, not as a young bride, but as a woman still deeply in love. Every detail was meticulously prepared. The guest list, the string quartet, her ivory dress with lace sleeves. To Lauren, love wasn't just a memory. It was a commitment that aged like fine wine. Their house in Montclair was always alive with noise. Not chaos, but the kind of joyful clamor that comes from teenagers, late-night talks, and the splashes of the pool in summer. Claire, their 20-year-old daughter, came home from college most weekends, often bringing her best friend Erin along. Erin was warm, polite, and effortlessly charming, winning Lauren's heart with her quick laugh and eagerness to help around the kitchen. She blended into their family like cream into coffee, never intrusive, always present. Scott, usually distant and too tired from court, surprised Lauren by showing unusual interest in Erin. They would talk for hours about her anthropology classes, sitting side by side on the veranda, exchanging thoughts and theories. Lauren was touched by it. She thought it was a sign of Scott mellowing with age. On one breezy Sunday morning, the house smelled of pancakes and fresh coffee. Claire woke to voices in the hallway and opened her door quietly, curiosity tingling in her chest. She caught the end of a conversation, her father's voice low but stern, and Erin's tone tense. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes darting between them. "Oh, just noise," Scott replied quickly. "Your dad said my shoes make too much noise on the stairs," Erin added with a nervous laugh. Claire blinked, unconvinced but unwilling to push further. There was something unspoken in the air, a tension that hovered just out of reach. The morning went on like nothing had happened. Lauren made brunch, everyone smiled, and Claire tucked the memory away, uncertain of its meaning. The long-awaited day of the vow renewal arrived with golden September light casting a romantic glow over the garden. Lauren stood at the edge of the aisle, heart pounding, eyes glistening. Friends and family gathered. Music floated in the breeze, and Claire adjusted her mother's veil. Everything was perfect. But as the officiant cleared his throat and Scott turned to face Lauren, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I'm sorry," Erin said, stepping forward, her face pale but determined. "I can't let this go on." A hush fell over the guests, and Lauren's smile faded into confusion. Erin's next words shattered the air like glass. "I'm pregnant, and the father is Scott." Time froze. The music stopped. Claire gasped. Chaos erupted. Some guests tried to usher Erin away. Others stood in stunned silence. Lauren stood paralyzed, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Scott didn't deny it. He didn't move. He looked down as if ashamed, as if defeated. The garden that was meant to echo with love now throbbed with betrayal. Claire, in shock, walked out. Carl, their 16-year-old son, clenched his fists but said nothing. Lauren's world unraveled in one breath, one truth. Erin's betrayal cut deep, but Scott's cut through bone. The man she loved, the man she would have vowed to again, had been living another life under her roof. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Scott packed his bags 2 days later, leaving behind more than just furniture and clothes. He left Lauren with a home full of echoes and children full of questions. The legal battles began swiftly. He wanted to divide everything. She wanted to protect her children, her memories, her sanity. Claire refused to speak to him. Carl retreated into himself. The family dinners became silent. The photos on the walls seemed to mock her. Erin, now visibly pregnant, vanished from their lives, but her presence lingered like a ghost. Lauren, once a wife and mother full of purpose, now wandered the halls alone. The house, once alive, had died, but somewhere deep inside, something in her began to stir. If this story has already touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments. What kind of romantic stories do you want to see next? More twists, more second chances. This is just the beginning. And we're only getting started. Lauren didn't cry at first. Her body froze under a silence so denso it seemed to suffocate the garden. Guests stood paralyzed, unsure whether to sit, run, or pretend it hadn't happened. Erin's words echoed no longer in sound, but in memory, replaying like a cursed lullaby. "I'm pregnant, and it's his." For the first time in 25 years, Lauren looked at Scott not with love or admiration, but with estrangement. She didn't recognize the man beside her. His silence was the loudest betrayal. He didn't deny. He didn't explain. He simply lowered his gaze and confirmed everything with a coward's quiet. Claire was the first to move. Her face flushed with a rage Lauren had never seen before. "You're disgusting," she spat at her father, voice trembling. "You lied to all of us." Her hands shook, but her eyes stayed locked on him. Carl stood behind her, silent, pale, holding back tears he didn't know how to release. Scott tried to speak, but Claire raised a hand to stop him. "You don't get to talk. Not today." Lauren remained still. Her daughter's words were her own. And yet, deeper inside, she felt something worse than anger. She felt humiliated, forgotten. The guests began to disperse, awkward and guilty, stepping away from the tragedy they had just witnessed. Some tried to comfort Lauren, but she stood like a statue among the flowers, the echo of betrayal settling in her bones. Erin was gone. No one knew when she had left, but her words had done their damage. Scott stood a few steps away, still in his tailored suit, stained not with wine but with disgrace. He tried to reach for Lauren's hand one last time. She didn't flinch. She simply turned, walked inside the house and closed the door. And for the first time in 2 decades, she locked it behind her. That night, the house was silent. No music, no laughter, no teenage voices by the pool. Just the sound of a woman breaking. Claire sat by her mother's bed, holding her hand, whispering apologies she didn't owe. Carl curled on the couch downstairs, trying to block out the noise of his own thoughts. Scott never came back that night. He left with nothing but his car keys, a phone full of unread messages, and a soul that had burned every bridge. The bed Lauren once shared with him felt enormous, cold. She didn't sleep. She just stared at the ceiling, remembering every detail she had missed, every lie disguised as routine. The days that followed were brutal. Scott had moved into a small apartment near his firm. He asked to see the kids, but Claire refused. "You're not just my father. You're the man who destroyed my mother." Carl was quieter, confused, still processing. Lauren contacted a lawyer. The division of assets would be messy. Scott's name was on everything, but she had fire in her now. A quiet, dangerous fire that had nothing to do with revenge. It was about dignity, survival, rebirth. The woman who once smiled over Sunday breakfasts was now someone else. Still broken, yes, but awakening. Then came the letter. A small, cream envelope without a sender. Lauren almost threw it away, thinking it was more legal garbage. But the handwriting was familiar. Too familiar. Inside a single page. "I heard about everything. I never stopped thinking about you." Her hands trembled. It had been over 20 years. His name was Mark Reynolds. Once, he had been her summer before Scott. Her could have been. Her what if. She read the letter again, then again. Her heart, still bruised, throbbed with something dangerous. Curiosity. Could this be the beginning of something new? Or another illusion? The days that followed were like a silent morning inside the house. Lauren woke up but didn't live. She wandered through the kitchen like a ghost, preparing coffee that no one drank, cleaning a living room that no one visited anymore. The young voices had vanished, as if joy had been banished along with Scott. The pool, once full of laughter and loud music, now only reflected the gray September sky. Claire began sleeping at home every day. She was afraid to leave her mother alone, even though Lauren insisted she was fine. Carl skipped school, locked in his room. His eyes dry and soul tangled. The home that once felt like a warm haven had become an emotional ruin. Scott tried to make contact multiple times, but his messages were left unread. "I made a mistake. We need to talk. I still love you," words that oozed from the screen like poison. Lauren never replied. Claire, upon reading them, would explode. "Love. You don't know what that is." Carl, buried in his silence, began to shift. He stayed out late, avoided his friends, answered with one-word grunts. Lauren tried to reach him but felt him slipping away too. The family collapse wasn't limited to a man's betrayal. It was the implosion of an entire world, a love castle that, as it crumbled, crushed everything beneath it. The legal process began. Dividing the assets was another wound opened with every paper signed. Scott, shielded by a team of attorneys, tried to appear civil, but Lauren could read between the lines. His arrogance, his sense of ownership, as if the house, the furniture, even the kids, were part of his portfolio. Claire sat through every meeting with clenched jaw and fiery eyes. Carl refused to attend. "Let me know when it's over," he said, pretending not to care. But his silent anger was what worried Lauren most. This wasn't just breaking her heart. It was damaging the kids in ways she feared she couldn't fix. One rainy night, while organizing old documents in the attic, Lauren found a forgotten box. Inside were letters, old photographs, memories of a time she'd almost erased. Among them, one envelope stood out. The name Mark Reynolds, written in deep blue ink. in a hand both strong and gentle. Her heart skipped. Mark had been her first love before Scott. During the last summer when she still believed love alone was enough. They had never spoken again after that farewell at Ashland Lake Pier. But there it was, his name, calling from the past like a rhythm that refused to die. The next morning, Claire found her mother on the porch, letter in hand, eyes distant. "Who's Mark?" she asked softly. Lauren hesitated, then gave a faint smile, the first in weeks. Someone time couldn't quite erase. Claire didn't press. She just sat beside her and rested her head on Lauren's shoulder. For the first time, they weren't crying over pain. They were looking ahead, still broken but moving. It wasn't hope yet, but something close. Lauren knew she had to find out if that old memory could become something new, or if love was a place she could never return to. But Mark wasn't just a memory. That same afternoon, Lauren received an email titled, "After everything, do you still think of me?" The sender confirmed it, Mark. 24 years later. He was back in New Jersey, now a literature professor at a local university. He had read about the scandal with Scott in the papers and, after years of silence, decided to reach out. The message was warm, respectful, and ended with one question. "Can I see you?" Lauren felt the floor shift again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something she'd forgotten how to feel. Desire. Lauren agreed to meet him at Ashland Lake, where it had all begun. She told no one, not Claire, not Carl. Felt sacred, private. The day of the meeting, she wore a soft blue sweater and a long coat, unsure why she cared about looking beautiful again. When she saw him across the water, her breath caught. Mark had silver at his temples now, but the same kind eyes. They didn't hug, not at first. They just stood there, looking at each other with the silence of two souls that had taken different roads and still somehow arrived at the same place. "You came," he whispered. Lauren smiled, and in that smile was something both wounded and wide open. Lauren hesitated for several days before replying to Mark's email. She would write a sentence and erase it immediately, unsure of what words could bridge 24 years of silence. She wasn't the girl from the pier anymore. She had loved, built a family, buried dreams, and watched herself disappear behind someone else's shadow. But on a Thursday evening, after washing dishes no one thanked her for, she sat at the kitchen table with her fingers trembling over the keyboard and wrote, "Yes, I would like to see you." Her heart pounded like it had memory, as if it recognized something she was trying to forget. Mark replied an hour later. The message was simple, with an address and time, but it ended with something that made her chest tighten. "I never stopped wondering." The cafe they agreed on was a small place tucked into a quiet corner of town, the kind where the past doesn't feel so far away. On the day of their meeting, Lauren chose a navy dress, modest but elegant, and wore her mother's old locket, the one Mark used to twirl between his fingers when words failed them. She looked in the mirror, searching for the version of herself he once knew, and hoped she still existed beneath the years. When she entered the cafe, her eyes scanned quickly and then stopped. Mark stood near the back, at the same table they always used to choose, and though time had etched itself gently into his face, his smile hadn't aged a day. It was warm, real, and without agenda. When he stood and said her name, it wasn't just a greeting. It was a memory, a melody, something sacred pulled from the folds of time. "Lauren." Her name sounded softer coming from him, like it had been waiting to be spoken again. They embraced, awkward at first, then completely familiar. The years melted between them in silence. They sat, and as the minutes passed, words flowed effortlessly. They spoke of their lives. His quiet one, filled with literature, lectures, and solitary hikes. Hers filled with school meetings, silent dinners, and years spent putting out fires she never started. Mark hadn't married. "I tried," he admitted. "But she was never you." Lauren lowered her gaze, unsure of how to carry a compliment so heavy and true. "I thought you moved on," he said. "I did," she replied, "until it all moved without me." They talked for 2 hours, maybe 3. Neither really noticed. She found herself laughing, not politely, but freely, and she noticed how Mark still listened with his eyes, as if every word she said mattered. It had been decades since someone made her feel heard without trying to fix her. They reminisced about Ashland Lake, about the way her hair curled wildly in the summer humidity, about how he used to write her poems on torn notebook paper. "You always hated your knees," he said, grinning. "And you always kissed them anyway," she answered, and they both laughed. There were no expectations, no pressure, just two people carefully unwrapping a shared past, wondering if anything inside still fit. Outside, the wind danced with autumn leaves as if the season itself was eavesdropping. When they finally stood to leave, Mark walked her to her car, slow, steady, quiet. "You look like someone who forgot she could be seen," he said again, this time with deeper weight. Lauren didn't answer. She didn't need to. The warmth behind her eyes told him everything. The days after their reunion felt like discovering a hidden garden in a familiar city. They exchanged messages every morning, sometimes quotes from books, sometimes just "thinking of you." He sent her a photo of a bench under a golden tree, saying it reminded him of her presence, strong, still, full of shade. She found herself waiting for his messages like a teenager, but without shame. Claire noticed. "There's a light around you again," she said one morning while making coffee. Carl watched from a distance, unsure, cautious, as if waiting for this happiness to expire like everything else. But Lauren felt something different this time. This wasn't distraction, it was recognition. A remembering of who she was before she sacrificed every heartbeat for someone else's comfort. She didn't tell Mark everything. Not yet. But she began writing again, journaling thoughts that hadn't seen daylight in years. It felt like her voice had been hiding behind silence, waiting for this exact season to bloom. And then there was Thomas. Steady, reliable Thomas, the neighbor who never intruded but always noticed. He continued to appear with groceries, small repairs, and warm, quiet words. One evening, he brought her fresh tomatoes from his garden and found her sitting outside, lost in thought. "I'm glad to see you smiling again," he said, sitting beside her. They talked about weather, Carl's grades, music from the 80s, and at one point, their hands brushed, and neither of them moved. There was something tender in his gaze, something that didn't ask for anything but presence. Lauren realized then that love could come quietly too, not like thunder, but like rain that softened the earth. She didn't know what she felt yet, but she knew this. She was no longer numb, and maybe that was the beginning of everything. One crisp Saturday, she found herself at a crossroads, Mark had invited her to a literature reading at the university, while Thomas had asked if she'd like to join him for dinner at his sister's house. For the first time in years, she had a choice that wasn't about duty, guilt, or obligation. It was about desire. Not romance, not drama. Just a longing to feel alive again. She stood before her closet, uncertain of what to wear, and for a moment, her reflection smiled back at her. It was a different smile. Not the polite one she wore for years, but something real, born from within. Whether it was the poetry of Mark's past or the tenderness of Thomas's present, Lauren was no longer seeking rescue. She was choosing presence, choosing herself. And in that moment, standing in her bedroom wrapped in the golden silence of late afternoon, she realized, maybe the happiest endings aren't the ones we waited for, but the ones we never saw coming. Claire had always been close to her mother, but after the betrayal, something inside her shifted. She found herself feeling protective, defensive even, of Lauren's emotions, as if her own healing depended on her mother's restoration. Watching Lauren bloom again was both a relief and a wound. It was beautiful, yes, but also unsettling. "Who is he?" she asked one morning, eyes sharp but voice soft. "Mark," Lauren answered honestly, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea. "From my past. A long time ago." Claire nodded slowly. "And the neighbor?" she added, tilting her head. Lauren smiled. "Thomas is kind." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. Claire sighed, unsure how to process this new version of her mother. A woman who wore earrings on a Tuesday and hummed while folding clothes. Carl, on the other hand, had retreated into silence. He barely spoke at dinner, avoided eye contact, and spent more time at friends' houses. One night, Lauren knocked on his door. "You can be angry," she whispered. "Just don't disappear." But Carl only stared at the wall and replied, "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore." The betrayal had cracked something deep in all of them. Not just their trust in Scott, but their understanding of what family meant. For 25 years, Lauren had carried the emotional architecture of their home like an invisible weight. She had been the warmth, the rhythm, the reason birthdays were remembered and holidays were magical. And now she was something else, still mother but also woman, human, heart. That duality confused the children, especially Carl, who still hadn't forgiven his father, nor fully embraced the fact that their home now included silence where a man's voice used to be. Lauren didn't push. Instead, she cooked his favorite meals, left notes on his desk, and once slipped an old photo of the three of them under his pillow with the words, "Love doesn't end. It adapts." Slowly, Carl began to come back. Not with words, but with small gestures. He started eating at the table again. He asked her once if she remembered how to make his favorite cinnamon rolls. She made them that night and he said, "They taste the same." And in that moment, it felt like a door had opened, just slightly, but enough to let the light back in. Meanwhile, Mark continued to be gentle, never rushing, never asking for more than Lauren was ready to give. He sent her a book he thought she'd like. Poems about second chances and quiet mornings. She read them slowly, underlining verses that spoke to her wounds. One read, "We are not broken. We are folded, creased by life, not torn by it." She copied it onto a post-it and stuck it on the fridge. Mark invited her to his class one evening, a lecture on memory and longing in literature. She sat in the back, unnoticed by most, but completely seen by him. When he quoted a passage about lost love returning through unexpected doors, his eyes met hers across the room, and in that fleeting glance, there was something sacred, like the acknowledgement of a prayer answered. Afterward, they walked together in silence, and Mark said, "You feel more like home to me than any place I've ever been." Lauren didn't answer. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the moment say what words couldn't. But Thomas wasn't absent. He continued to show up, not in grand gestures, but in reliable presence. He fixed the door that squeaked, brought her favorite chai from the market she always forgot to go to. Once, when the wind had knocked over her mailbox, he had it standing upright before she even noticed. There was comfort in his steadiness, in the way he didn't ask questions but always listened when she needed to talk. One evening, after she mentioned how much she missed dancing, he cleared the furniture in his living room, played an old Nat King Cole record, and held out his hand. "Just one song," he said. They danced slowly, clumsily, but with a joy that made Lauren laugh until tears welled up in her eyes. Afterward, as they sat on the couch, he looked at her and said, "I may not be your first or your grand passion, but I would make every day peaceful for you." That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. Her heart wasn't torn, it was awakening. And in that awakening, she realized that love wasn't a choice between two men. It was a return to herself. The town had started talking. Whispers about the woman whose husband left her for a college girl, and who now had two men circling her like moths around candlelight. But Lauren didn't care. She wasn't living for their approval anymore. What mattered was that she felt again. Felt joy, confusion, possibility, and the richness of days that no longer bled into each other in beige silence. Her therapy sessions deepened. She spoke about her childhood, her dreams, and the version of herself she thought had died after 20 years of marriage. "I didn't lose my spark," she said once. "I just gave it away in teaspoons." Her therapist smiled. "And now," she answered, "I'm pouring it into the life I choose." She began planning a garden, bought a canvas and started painting again, even if only flowers and skies. And one afternoon, as she knelt in the soil planting hydrangeas, she whispered to herself, "This is not a rebirth. This is a return." Still, one question lingered like a thread she hadn't pulled. Could she trust herself to love again? Not out of loneliness or nostalgia, but with full presence. Both Mark and Thomas offered her a path, one steeped in shared memories, and the other in steady companionship. She didn't need to choose now. For once she had time, and the space to grow into her answer. Claire began visiting more often, helping with the garden, sitting beside her on cool evenings with mugs of mint tea. Carl slowly warmed back into family dinners, his voice more frequent, his laughter returning in small bursts. And Lauren, she stood in her kitchen one morning, watching the light fall across the tiles, and felt whole, not because a man had restored her, but because she had reclaimed herself. And whatever came next, love, solitude, a new home, a new chapter, she was ready. Because finally, she wasn't living in reaction to pain. She was writing the story line by line with her own voice. And for the first time in years, it was a story worth telling. Lauren's days began to pulse with a delicate rhythm of hope and hesitation. Each morning she woke with a question tangled in her chest. Who am I meant to be now? Mark called regularly, his voice steady, a calm harbor in the storm of her thoughts. Thomas was often at her door, quietly supporting without demands, a steady shadow at the edges of her life. Yet the choice between them remained elusive, like the shifting tides that refused to settle. Claire, now more protective than ever, asked pointed questions about what Lauren wanted, not what anyone else expected. Carl, still distant but healing, cautiously offered his approval when Lauren introduced Mark at a family dinner. The weight of years hung in the air, memories of betrayal still whispering in quiet corners of their home. But Lauren was learning to listen to her own heart, even when it was fractured, even when the path forward seemed uncertain. The past had shattered their family, but the present offered shards of light to be pieced together into something new and unexpected. One evening, Lauren and Mark sat beneath a canopy of stars in the garden she had planted, the scent of jasmine heavy in the warm air. Mark's hand brushed against hers, a silent question hanging between them. "Lauren," he said softly, "I've carried this quiet love for you through years I thought were lost. But I don't want to be the man waiting in the wings anymore. I want to be the one you turn to." Lauren swallowed the lump in her throat, her gaze fixed on the silver constellations above. She thought about the comfort of Thomas's hands, the way he held her steady when tears threatened, the peace that settled around them like a soft blanket. But Mark's words felt like a spark, dangerous, thrilling, and impossible to ignore. Her heart beat faster, a fierce storm of fear and desire swirling inside. Could she dare to trust this love that had waited patiently in the shadows? Or was she risking everything for a dream that might never come true? Meanwhile, Scott's presence lingered like a ghost in the corners of their lives. His departure had fractured more than just a marriage. It had shaken the foundations of their family's identity. Claire wrestled with a torrent of emotions, oscillating between bitterness and sorrow. One afternoon, she confronted her father at his office, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "How could you do this to us? To Mom?" Scott's expression was unreadable, a blend of regret and defiance. "I didn't plan to hurt anyone," he whispered. "But I had to live my truth." Claire left with tears blurring her vision, the fragile hope she once held now a fragile thread. Carl, watching his sister's pain, retreated further into silence, the fracture between father and children widening into an unbridgeable chasm. Lauren felt torn between protecting her children and finding peace herself, caught in a storm that showed no signs of abating. One unexpected night, Thomas surprised Lauren with tickets to a small theater production, a local story about love lost and found. Sitting side by side in the dim light, their hands found each other, tentative yet sure. The play's final scene, a tender embrace after years apart, echoed in Lauren's heart. As the curtain fell, Thomas whispered, "Whatever happens, I'm here." His words wrapped around her like a promise, steady and unwavering. In that moment, Lauren realized that love came in many forms, not just grand gestures or passionate confessions, but in quiet devotion and the courage to stand beside someone through the storms. The warmth of Thomas's hand in hers was a balm to wounds she hadn't known were still raw. She glanced at him, a soft smile blooming despite the turmoil. Could she accept this steady love without fearing she was settling? Or was this the kind of love that truly healed? The house, once a place of whispered secrets and shattered dreams, began to breathe again with tentative laughter and shared memories. Lauren found solace in small routines. Morning coffees with Claire, late-night talks with Carl, moments of quiet with Mark and Thomas. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of fear pulsed. Fear of being vulnerable, of losing control, of trusting again. But for the first time, she faced these fears head-on. With each passing day, Lauren wove a tapestry of resilience and hope, stitching together the fragments of her heart. She knew the road ahead was uncertain, but she no longer walked it alone. Love, in its unpredictable beauty, had returned. Not perfect but real. In the quiet stillness before dawn, Lauren stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle like distant promises. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Mark, a simple, "Thinking of you." She smiled, a single tear tracing down her cheek. It was not the end of her story, but a beginning, fragile and beautiful. She whispered a prayer, not for answers but for courage. To love fiercely, forgive deeply, and live fully. Whatever the future held, Lauren was ready to face it with an open heart. Because after the storm, after the betrayal and pain, she had found something more precious than she ever imagined: herself. Lauren never imagined she would find peace in the ruins of her marriage. But here she was, standing stronger, wiser, and ready to love again. The tension between Mark and Thomas had settled into an unspoken understanding, as if both men recognized the precious gift Lauren was reclaiming: herself. Claire and Carl watched their mother transform, not just in love but in spirit. The betrayal that once threatened to break them now forged an unbreakable bond between mother and children. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline of New Haven, Lauren gathered her family and whispered, "We are not defined by what we lose, but by how we rise." It was a promise to herself and to them, a vow to live boldly despite the shadows of the past. Scott tried to re-enter their lives, seeking forgiveness and a place back into the family he had fractured. But Lauren had learned a vital truth. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting, or forgetting did not mean opening doors to pain. She met him once, their conversation honest but final. "I hope you find peace," she told him softly. "But this is my life now." That moment marked the true end of one chapter, and the courageous beginning of another. Lauren's heart no longer carried the weight of betrayal. It held only the light of hope, healing, and new love. And as she stepped forward, hand in hand with Mark and Thomas, she knew the future was hers to shape, filled with love, strength, and grace. Love, she realized, was not a destination but a journey of rediscovery. With Mark, she found passion and shared history, the thrilling promise of what could have been and might still be. With Thomas, she found calm, kindness, and a gentle hand to steady her when the world felt too heavy. Each man offered a different kind of love, and Lauren embraced both as pieces of her whole. In their presence, she rediscovered laughter, trust, and the freedom to dream anew. The garden she had planted bloomed around her, a vivid metaphor for her own rebirth. No longer afraid to hope, Lauren's heart opened wide, ready for whatever life would bring next. One quiet afternoon, Lauren sat by the window, watching Claire and Carl laughing in the backyard. Her heart swelled with gratitude and bittersweet pride. Life had tested her beyond what she imagined possible, but she had not broken. Instead, she had become more. more resilient, more loving, more alive. Her story was not just about pain or betrayal, but about the power of forgiveness and the beauty of second chances. She whispered a prayer of thanks, knowing that every tear had watered the seeds of her new beginning. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of her family and the promise of love, Lauren finally felt whole. As the sun set on New Haven, Lauren looked forward with courage. The past was a shadow that would never fully fade, but it no longer controlled her. She was a woman renewed, ready to write the rest of her story with strength, grace, and love that defied the odds. Whatever came next, Lauren was no longer afraid, because in the end, she had discovered the most profound truth. The greatest love story is the one we live with ourselves. And for Lauren Simpson, that story was just beginning.